Hi, I'm Lieve with Professional Equine Grooms, and we're going to talk all about manes and tails today. But first, let's talk about skin and hair anatomy. The skin has three layers. The outermost layer is called the epidermis, and that's the layer that's protecting the skin, and it also will continuously grow and shed skin cells. The middle layer, which is called the dermis, is filled with vessels, blood vessels specifically. And the blood carries nutrients to the skin. The blood in the dermal layer also helps your horse regulate their body temperature. The dermis and hair follicles also contain lots of nerves, which helps your horse detect pressure, temperature, inflammation or pain, and itchiness. The dermis will also secrete proteins, collagen and elastin, and that gives structure to the skin and helps with its stretching and flexing. And lastly, there's a collection of immune cells in the dermis, which means that the skin is actually part of your horse's immune system. It's the first line of defense against outside invaders like microbes, bacteria, and fungus. The innermost layer of the skin, the subcutaneous layer, is filled with muscles and fat. The fat will help your horse's body regulate their temperature and stay warm. The fat will also hold in fluids to help keep your horse hydrated. And if you've ever noticed that your horse will twitch or flinch when a fly crawls on them, that's actually the muscles in that lower layer of the skin that's doing that. The twitch muscles, if you will. And just like the middle layer, there are blood vessels and nerves in that subcutaneous layer. And fun fact, a horse's hair and hooves and other keratin structures grow from that subcutaneous layer of skin. Hi, I'm Lieve with Professional Equine Grooms, and we're going to talk all about manes and tails today. But first, let's talk about skin and hair anatomy. The skin has three layers. The outermost layer is called the epidermis, and that's the layer that's protecting the skin, and it also will continuously grow and shed skin cells. The middle layer, which is called the dermis, is filled with vessels, blood vessels specifically. And the blood carries nutrients to the skin. The blood in the dermal layer also helps your horse regulate their body temperature. The dermis and hair follicles also contain lots of nerves, which helps your horse detect pressure, temperature, inflammation or pain, and itchiness. The dermis will also secrete proteins, collagen and elastin, and that gives structure to the skin and helps with its stretching and flexing. And lastly, there's a collection of immune cells in the dermis, which means that the skin is actually part of your horse's immune system. It's the first line of defense against outside invaders like microbes, bacteria, and fungus. The innermost layer of the skin, the subcutaneous layer, is filled with muscles and fat. The fat will help your horse's body regulate their temperature and stay warm. The fat will also hold in fluids to help keep your horse hydrated. And if you've ever noticed that your horse will twitch or flinch when a fly crawls on them, that's actually the muscles in that lower layer of the skin that's doing that. The twitch muscles, if you will. And just like the middle layer, there are blood vessels and nerves in that subcutaneous layer. And fun fact, a horse's hair and hooves and other keratin structures grow from that subcutaneous layer. Let's focus on the structure of the hair. In the skin, there are lots of hair follicles. These are like little vases in the skin that hold one strand of hair. And a horse's genetics will determine the size and the color of that hair. When we're talking about your horse's coat health and grooming your horse, we really want to focus on the sebum. That's that natural oil that your horse's sebaceous glands produce that coat each hair as it grows out of the follicle. Now, sebum has a lot of different functions. One of them is to keep your horse shiny, which we all love for the show ring, but it also helps keep your horse waterproof, which is important for them in bad weather and cold weather. Sebum is also great at helping your horse's skin stay soft and pliable, as well as containing lots of antimicrobial properties to help ward off bacterial and fungal invaders. And how does hair grow? There's actually three phases to a hair's life cycle. There's the growing phase, which is called the anagen phase, where the hair is actively growing from the follicle. It's getting longer and longer. And if you take any horse or any human or any dog or any cat, about 3/4 of the hair on their body is in an active anagen phase of growing. And after a certain amount of time growing, that hair enters the catagen phase where it kind of hangs out and rests, it's dormant. And the last phase, which is telogen, is when the hair starts to fall out and shed only to be replaced by a fresh hair later on. So when we talk about a horse having a really long mane or a really long tail, it's not because of anything grooming that you've done. They're genetically programmed to grow a certain amount of time, not a certain length. So what that means is if you have a horse that does not have a very balanced diet, that doesn't get properly cared for, that is deficient in proper grooming, the hair is going to keep growing for that set amount of time, but it's going to grow a lot shorter because the quality of the hair is not going to be as good as a horse with proper nutrition and proper grooming and husbandry skills. So you have a horse has a limited amount of time to grow really long hair, and you have to make sure that the inside of their body and the outside grooming habits support that, so the hair that does grow is super healthy and less likely to break. If you have a horse with a really long mane and or tail and you want to protect that, you can use very long and loose braids. You want something that's going to contain the hair to protect it against knots and getting tangled in reins and things like that, but you don't want it so tight that it's pulling on their skin and making them more likely to rub them out. So keep your braids long and loose and floppy, and that will help protect that long hair as it grows. And would you believe it, there's a couple of different types of hair that horses have on their bodies. They have permanent hair, which is like their manes and their tails, and don't get confused about the word permanent. It just means that that hair is not as actively shedding and being replaced by new hair that their coat does those 2 times a year when they are growing a summer coat and when they grow a winter coat. So even though it's called permanent hair, it's still going to fall out because it still goes through the anagen and the catagen and the telogen phases of growing. Horses also have temporary hair, which is like their hair coat, which according to how many hours of sunshine their brains are noticing, they will grow or shed a coat. And then we have tactile hairs. These are called vibrissae. This is like your horse's whiskers and their eyebrows and some of their ear hairs. And these have a special capability of sending messages to your horse's brain about their environment, because a horse can't see very well under their chin or around their ears or very close to their eyes. And they need to have a way to sense what's going on if they're going to hit their head on something. They also need a sense with their whiskers about where the food is. And in some countries and show organizations like the FEI, clipping the vibrissae, those tactile hairs, is forbidden. So let's talk about a main myth that relates to all of this anatomy discussion. Many, many moons ago, decades ago, I learned that you can totally pull a horse's mane because there's no nerves in the mane. They can't feel it. That's actually not true. Their entire body, all of their skin is innervated, meaning there's nerves everywhere. And when you are pulling the mane to make it shorter and thinner, you're removing the hair from the root. And horses will definitely feel that. Some horses don't mind at all. Other horses are really sensitive to it. So if you need to prepare your horse's mane for either a show where you're going to be braiding or you just want to tidy things up, really think about pulling versus shortening the mane in a different manner. How do you take care of your horse's mane and tail on a daily basis? The routine of it. The first thing I do is I use my eyes and my hands, my fingertips specifically, to make sure that I don't find anything weird in the skin and the base of the mane and the tail. I'm specifically looking for cuts and scrapes, bumps, ticks and other insects, and any new itchy places that might have popped up. You might also find patches of dandruff or little spots of hair loss. Now, all of these strange things that your horse might have you discover, some of them are totally benign. Other times you might need to loop your vet in if it becomes a bigger situation or it's just really uncomfortable for your horse. And after I make sure there's nothing weird living in their mane and their tail, I will then pick out any big shavings, little twigs, maybe leaves and things like that that they pick up from being out and about. And it can sometimes help, especially if you find a tangle or a wind knot, to use a bit of grooming oil, and you can get really heavy-handed with this and let it sit on a knot or something that's really tangled quite well. Let it sit for 5 minutes or so, and then you can gently pick it apart from the bottom moving up to get rid of that knot without damaging the hair. You could also use a sheen spray as a detangler, but if you're finding knots and bigger tangles, then you want to go for the grooming oil just to give that extra protection against any breakage. And when you do this every single day, you can keep track of the condition of the horse's tail and mane, which means you're going to be shampooing it on a more regular basis, and you're going to be adding your conditioner and your detangler so that wind knots and other tail problems are going to be further down the line of possibility. A little bit every day is much better than doing a big project on the weekends. And every now and again, you're gonna find the need that your horse's mane needs kind of like a little bit of a spa day. Maybe it's gotten a little long and unruly and it's time to do some tidying up. And a lot of this depends on what your personal preference is, but some of it might depend on the show organization or the discipline that you ride, because there are traditional ways of presenting your horse. For example, the hunters have a lot of teeny tiny little braids. Some Arabian saddle seat breeds have really, really long manes with a really long bridle path cut down. So it depends on the horse and if you are showing and what discipline and what show organizations you are in. And I will always recommend having a bridle path for your horse. When you have a bridle path for your horse, the bridle and the halter are going to fit much better and more comfortably. Imagine putting a ponytail in your hair and you have the ponytail holder, and then putting a baseball hat and it goes right over that ponytail holder. That's going to create a pressure point. The same thing happens when your horse has a really thick mane and you're putting a bridle or halter over it. Now, when you create that bridle path, everything can lay smoothly, the pressure is distributed evenly, and a lot more horses are going to be a lot more comfortable. You might also decide that roaching your horse's mane is the best course. And sometimes a horse's mane is just too thick for the climate that it'll live in, and it gets too sweaty and gross, and it can trap all that moisture and create a bacterial infection. Maybe your horse has sweet itch, and roaching the mane is a great way to apply topical medications to help heal that infection. Sometimes it's the breed standard to have a roached mane. You should treat the forelock the same way you do the rest of the mane. Daily attention, picking out, conditioning, keeping everything sleek. And if you use a fly mask or something that puts a lot of pressure on that forelock area, you might want to consider using a fly mask that has an opening. And you could also add a little extra conditioning oil to just give it some slickeriness and reduce the friction that any masks might press on that area. And you might also decide that every now and again it's time to have a spa day for your horse's tail. And there's two things that you can do, and again, these are sometimes discipline dependent. You could trim the top of the tail. So sometimes horses get like really crazy tail tops. And a lot of eventers do this because it gives the illusion that the hind muscles are bigger when that top of the tail is quite thin and lean. You can pull the tail, but again, just like pulling the mane, they're going to feel that. You can clip the inside edges of the tail, or you can use your scissors to cut up and down and bring those fuzzy edges of the tail closer into the tailbone. At the bottom of the tail, you might choose to bang it, and that creates a nice straight line across the bottom. Now, in some disciplines like the hunters, you're never going to see a banged tail, but you would see them more in the dressage arena. And a note about banging a horse's tail, it's super if your horse's tail is on the thin side because it adds a little bit of volume at the bottom. But if you have a very thick tail like a Frisian might, banging that tail is going to make it look like a really big giant Christmas tree, and it's not going to be super aesthetic at all. How do you wash your horse's mane and tail? Well, in the summer, it's pretty easy. You know, lukewarm or warm water, some shampoo, some conditioner, and a detangler. And the most important thing as you are washing and maintaining your horse's tail in the wash rack is to get all of the last bits of shampoo and product out of the tail, especially those that touch the tailbone. And when you're thinking about shampooing your horse's tail, focus on the skin and the tail top, and then the rest can just get, you know, a little bit of shampoo as all of the foam and bubbles drip down. When you're deciding on what shampoo to use, think about what your horse's needs are. Do they need a little extra shine on their coat? In which case you could use a shine booster. Do they need a little help with coloring? Maybe there's some sun bleaching going on, or if you have a gray horse with a yellowish tail, you could add in a brightening shampoo. For horses that are really sensitive and prone to dandruff and insect reactions and itchiness, look for a shampoo that has some lemongrass and tea tree oil in it. That's very soothing, especially if you let it sit on for 5 minutes or so. And when you're applying conditioner, you can let it sit in for a minute or two and then rinse it out as best you can. And finishing with a white vinegar rinse helps keep the tail clean. It brightens kind of yellowish tails, and it helps reduce the amount of residue and stuff that might be on your horse's tailbone. If you opt not to do a conditioner on your horse's tail, that's totally fine. You can wash it, you can let it dry a little bit, and then add a dollop of grooming oil to act as the conditioner and the detangler. If you use too much, you can rinse a little bit of it off with shampoo, but I would recommend doing 1 or 2 dollops. And by dollops, I mean like maybe a quarter size in your palm is perfect for a tail. Then you just massage that into the tail, and then you can easily brush it out. And I prefer to brush it out not when the tail is wet and not when it's dry, kind of halfway in the middle, like Goldilocks. In the winter, it gets a little bit trickier to clean the mane simply because it's attached to their neck and water runs down by gravity. So you could use a hot toweling method where you use a lot of hot water, make it nice and steamy, some cloths, and mix into that hot water some no-rinse shampoo and some spot remover. And then using a hot washcloth soaked in your concoction, wring it out very well, and then use that to massage into the mane to lift some of that dirt. You can also spray the no-rinse shampoo and spot remover directly onto the mane and tail, and then use a hot rag that's just got a little bit of water in it to kind of pull down those hair strands to lift the dirt out. But what do we do about yellow tails? This is really common on gray horses and horses that have a little bit of white that shows up in their tails. Well, we're going to have to blast the stains out. And the first thing to do is to use a whitening shampoo. Now, these are purple because the purple counteracts the yellow color. And some of them even have additional shine and sparkles added to it to give a nice little shiny pop after done. And I definitely recommend rinsing the tail with white vinegar after you're done with the whitening shampoo. But let's talk about ketchup. Now, ketchup is one of those things the internet will tell you is great to whiten tails, but here's the thing. Ketchup's main ingredient is vinegar, well, and tomatoes. But if you're looking for the active ingredient, it's going to be the vinegar. So instead of using ketchup, which you have to apply and then shampoo out to get the vinegar, just go ahead and skip the ketchup and go straight for the white vinegar as a rinse. We want to make sure that it's conditioned, and I love the grooming oil for this very purpose. You can also use pigment in a can, touch-ups, to create a white tail. And it's going to start out yellow, and you're going to fan the tail out, and you're just going to spray lightly. You can add a couple of layers, and this will brighten the tail. It lasts more than one day, definitely more than one day. And this is great for the show ring, or if you're doing a special event or a clinic or a rally. If your horse has a tendency to get a yellow tail, there's a couple of things you can do. One, pick your horse's bedding more often to maybe play around with different types of bedding. You can use those absorbent pellets underneath and put a layer of fluff on top. 3, you can use tail bags, but be sure that your horse's urine stream, if you have a mare, isn't going to land in that bag. And be sure if you use a tail bag that you have no flies around, because your horse needs his tail to swat those flies. If you're using a tail bag, be sure that you put your horse's tail in a nice loose braid that starts below the tailbone. And it's often nice to add a layer of deep conditioning, maybe add some extra grooming oil before you bag everything up. And then as you're knotting the bag, make sure it is, again, below that tailbone. You definitely want to check things at least every day to make sure it's not getting filled with manure stains and urine stains. And then you can change it as necessary. Also, keep your horse blankets clean. That will help with yellow tails. And Instead of using a tail cord that goes underneath the tail, use leg straps instead, especially for mares, because sometimes the urine stream will catch into that tail cord and then just get distributed everywhere.